Hello everyone, welcome to Sleep Space. Tonight we're exploring a subject that humankind has turned toward in its quietest hours, its darkest nights, and its brightest revelations. We're asking a question that refuses to stay buried under cultural beliefs or scientific boundaries. What exactly happens after death? To do this, we're going to walk through a body of information that once startled both publishers and skeptics alike. In 1972, a manuscript landed on a desk that was promptly turned away. Not because it was incoherent or outrageous for the sake of attention, but because the material felt, according to the editors, too dangerous for public consumption. It described death not as an ending, but as an intricate, structured transition, mapped in detail by something claiming to stand outside the human condition. The source was Seth, channeled by Jane Roberts, an entity described not as a wandering ghost or melodramatic oracle, but as a kind of cosmic professor, the sort that arrives in a classroom no one remembers enrolling in. Whether you take Seth literally, metaphorically, psychologically, or as an uncommon spark of creative genius, the descriptions are among the most comprehensive blueprints of the after-death process ever articulated. Tonight, we're not here to debate the origin. We're here to explore the material itself, to step into the framework and let it speak for itself, as if we're walking through the architecture of a new city built from unfamiliar physics. Let's begin at the moment of death, not symbolically, not philosophically, but at the exact tipping point when the body releases the mind and consciousness realizes it is no longer tethered to a biological machine. It begins earlier than you might think. According to this material, death doesn't arrive like a curtain drop. It approaches more like a backstage crew dimming the lights before a scene change. The personality, your identity, your sense of I, starts loosening its grip on physical reality a little before the final breath. Think of it as shifting from a dense atmosphere to a lighter one, where the rules begin to stretch, soften, and finally give way. People close to death often describe unusual perception, seeing loved ones who've already died, hearing music when none is playing, feeling the room open up as if space is becoming porous. In this map, those experiences aren't hallucinations, they're early steps in the transition. The consciousness begins drifting from a world governed by linear time and physical cause and effect toward one shaped by thought, intention, and emotion. What happens the moment the body stops? Seth's description is surprisingly gentle. There's no violent snap, no cinematic wrenching of the soul from the flesh. Instead, it's a release, like taking off a suit you didn't realize had grown heavy over the years. Sensation shifts rather than disappears. Awareness lifts rather than weakens. You find yourself in a space that feels both familiar and impossible, like waking from a long dream and remembering there was another life running parallel to the one you just left. One of the first experiences is clarity, not the sharp, logical clarity people expect, but a clarity of being. You're suddenly aware of yourself in a way that's difficult to achieve in a body. Aware of your thoughts, your intentions, the texture of your own consciousness, as though your inner world is now an external landscape. This isn't floating on a cloud. It's closer to entering a hyper-responsive environment where everything you feel manifests, a realm made of psychological substance, where thought is architecture. At first, this can be confusing. Many people, according to the material, don't realize they've died. Not because they're dull or in denial, but because their consciousness is still using the habits of physical perception. They think in terms of rooms, hands, breath, direction. They expect a heartbeat, and for a while, they feel as if they still have one. But there's a moment, a turning point, when the truth breaks through. It can come quietly, like noticing that gravity isn't behaving the way it should, or it can come as a kind of serene revelation. You realize you're moving without muscles, seeing without eyes, hearing without ears. None of this is frightening. It's more like remembering the password to a part of yourself you forgot existed. Then something remarkable happens, what Seth called the transition guide experience. Not a robed figure or a winged being, nothing drawn from religious iconography by default. Instead, you're met by someone or something calibrated precisely to your expectations, your comfort, and your psychological language. For some, it's a familiar face, often someone who has already passed, but sometimes someone who never lived physically at all. For others, it's a symbolic figure, a teacher, a presence, a sense of being welcomed rather than escorted. The guide's job isn't to judge or evaluate, it's to stabilize you, like a friend holding your arm when you first stand after a long sleep. Your thoughts become luminous here, visible almost. The environment responds to your internal world with perfect fidelity. If you think of a door appears. If you think of a landscape, it unfurls. If you think of someone you loved, their presence may form as an echo of memory or an actual contact. But this doesn't mean you're hallucinating your own afterlife. It's more like the landing room is a canvas that reacts to your energy. You temporarily inhabit a psychological buffer zone designed to ease your transition from physical rules to interdimensional rules. The environment becomes a mirror, not to trap you, but to show you who you are without the camouflage of a body. One of the most profound aspects comes next, the life review. But not the judgment-heavy slideshow often portrayed in popular culture. This version is far more nuanced. You experience your life from the inside and the outside. You feel your emotions, and you feel the emotions of the people you interacted with, not as punishment, but as understanding, as if you're walking through a gallery of your own choices and discovering how each brushstroke affected the entire painting. This review isn't forced on you, it's self-chosen. The personality wants to understand its journey, the way a traveller wants to look back on the photographs of a long trip. You see the points where you grew, the points where you froze, the points where your decisions opened new corridors for others or closed doors you never realised you were touching. And here's something the 1972 manuscript emphasised. There's no shame in this, no moment where a booming voice condemns you. The review isn't about guilt, it's about comprehension. You see your life with a clarity impossible during physical existence because now the filters are gone. Fear, ego, insecurity, competition, all of it dissolves. Then, after this review, you encounter what Seth called the true personality, the larger version of yourself that doesn't fit inside a body. The physical you is like one finger on a hand, unique, expressive, but part of something bigger. When you die, the finger doesn't vanish. It returns to the hand, bringing back everything it learned. This reunion is less like merging and more like remembering. Your perspective expands. The concerns that felt immense in physical life begin to feel small in scale but meaningful in essence. You understand why you chose your life, what you wanted to experience, what you hoped to develop or overcome or create. The personality doesn't dissolve. You remain yourself, but with access to layers of your identity that you had temporarily set aside to live a human life. It's like discovering you had a library behind a locked door in your house, and now the door swings open. At this stage, people often fear the idea of losing loved ones or being separated from them. But according to this map, that separation never actually happens. Consciousness isn't constrained by distance or death. You can communicate instantly, meet instantly, understand instantly. The reunion with loved ones isn't metaphorical. It's direct and vivid, shaped by shared history and mutual recognition. These contacts feel more real than physical life because there's nothing between you. Not language barriers, not misunderstandings, not fears, just connection. Pure, immediate, unmistakable. Eventually, after experiencing this expanded state, the personality begins gravitating toward what the material calls probable environments, realms that reflect your interests, your growth, your intentions for further development. Some people gravitate toward creating, some toward teaching, some toward exploring new dimensions of experience. Some choose new incarnations, not as an escape, but as a continuation of curiosity. But before any of that unfolds, there is the quiet, luminous moment right after death. The moment when you realize you're still here, still aware, still yourself, and the universe feels like it has been holding its breath, waiting for you to notice it in full. When the first wave of transition settles, the initial clarity, the guide's presence, the easing away from physical habits, something subtle but profound begins to unfold. It's the phase where consciousness realizes that the territory ahead isn't structured the way the physical world is. There are no walls unless you expect them, no horizons unless your mind draws them, no gravity unless you believe in its embrace. You're standing, in a sense, inside a realm built from the substance of thought, and yet it feels more solid, more responsive, more exquisitely real than the thick world you just left behind. Seth described this stage as the intermediate reality, a space where your identity reacquaints itself with freedom. Not chaotic freedom, not drifting in formlessness, but a kind of creative elasticity. You've been living inside a dense suit with an instruction manual printed by biology. Now you find yourself in a place where the instructions rewrite themselves the moment you imagine something new. At first, many personalities cling to familiar structures. They imagine a continuation of rooms, landscapes, streets, homes. These appear instantly, not as illusions, but as stabilized constructions generated by the mind's own expectations. The after-death state isn't a hallucination factory. It's a feedback system where inner reality becomes outer terrain. And because consciousness is still shifting out of its physical habits, the landscapes tend to resemble what the person understands. Think of it this way. If your thoughts were weather, this realm would be a sky that instantly reflects every cloud you generate. Not as punishment, but as orientation. You're learning the new physics through direct experience. People who expected a void may find themselves in something like a quiet, spacious expanse that feels like dusk made of memory. People who expected a garden might discover one sprouting from their own inner imagery, complete with the scent of childhood summers. People who feared judgment may encounter a symbolic courtroom, not because an outside authority is condemning them, but because their inner conflicts manifest in familiar forms. These structures don't last forever. This is the training ground, the decompression chamber. As understanding expands, the need for these temporary constructs dissolves. The personality begins to sense something larger, its own multidimensional nature pulsing just out of reach, like a coastline in fog that gradually clears. One of the most intriguing aspects described in the 1972 material is how communication works here. It isn't telepathy in the sci-fi sense, where words get beamed into the mind. It's more like shared awareness. If you want to express a thought, the thought itself flows outward as a complete package. Emotion, intention, imagery, nuance, and the other being receives the entire essence instantly. There's no misinterpretation, no need for repeated explanations. It's communication without loss. This creates a kind of intimacy that's difficult to imagine on Earth. Conversations feel like standing in each other's experience for a moment. Understanding is immediate. It's difficult to lie, not because of punishment or surveillance, but because dishonesty has nowhere to hide. The environment reflects the truth of your energy. You might ask, does this mean everyone becomes enlightened the moment they die? Not at all. Growth continues. Identity continues. Curiosity continues. The after-death state isn't a graduation ceremony. It's more like the beginning of a new semester in a school built from consciousness itself. The personality doesn't suddenly become perfect, far from it, but it does become transparent to itself in ways that physical existence makes nearly impossible. During this stage, many people experience what might be called emotional balancing. Unresolved fears, unexpressed desires, unspoken truths. They don't haunt you like ghosts. They unfold like threads finally allowed to unwind. You're able to understand why certain patterns existed, why certain choices repeated, why certain relationships felt magnetized or impossible. Instead of wrestling with the past, you step into it with clarity, like reviewing a dream now that you're fully awake. This is where the life review deepens far beyond the initial panoramic experience. You don't just watch your life, you explore its architecture. You trace the patterns of belief that shaped your decisions. You see the moments where you limited yourself, not as failures, but as creative constraints you placed on your own journey. You understand that every moment, every frustration, every triumph, every heartbreak was a kind of brushstroke in a larger composition that you, at a broader level, helped design. There is a remarkable freedom in this understanding. Many personalities experience intense relief, as though shedding invisible weight. Regret loses its sting when you see the underlying purpose behind each moment. Even the painful memories shift tone. They stop feeling like scars and begin feeling like chapters. One of the most surprising teachings in the Seth material is that consciousness doesn't move through these experiences alone. You are constantly accompanied, not by one single guide, but by an entire network of beings connected to your identity across dimensions. It's like discovering you were part of an ensemble cast the whole time, even though you only saw your own script while alive. Some of these presences feel deeply familiar. Others feel new, but strangely resonant, like meeting relatives you never knew you had. These companions don't direct your choices. They don't behave like authoritarian guardians. They're more like collaborators in a creative project. They offer insight when you seek it, perspective when you're ready, support when you open to it. In physical life, these connections can feel distant or metaphorical. After death, they become vividly present. And yet, despite this support, there is no pressure to move faster or understand more than you're comfortable with. The pace is self-set. The after-death state is deeply individualized. No two transitions look the same. A person who lived with a strong sense of curiosity might explore new realms quickly. Someone who was deeply attached to physical life might linger in familiar structures until they feel ready to expand. Someone who held rigid beliefs may initially encounter environments shaped by those beliefs until the rigidity softens and a wider perception becomes possible. Here, belief is both the doorway and the key. It shapes the initial environment, but it never becomes a prison. Sooner or later, the broader self nudges the personality toward greater freedom. One of the most unusual features of this stage is the ability to instantly re-experience any moment from your life, not as a memory, but as an immersive reality. If you want to revisit a childhood afternoon, you can enter it fully, seeing it from the eyes of your younger self, but with the broader perspective you now possess. This isn't escapism, it's understanding. It allows you to resolve unfinished threads with extraordinary precision. You can also enter pivotal moments from the perspective of others involved. You can step into the emotional atmosphere of someone you hurt, someone you loved, someone you misunderstood. This deepens the life review into something emotionally transformative. Understanding why someone acted as they did becomes effortless when you can feel their inner world. Forgiveness becomes less of a moral decision and more of a natural consequence of expanded perception. Another central process unfolds here: reintegration. Not merging into a single cosmic soup, but reconnecting with the larger identity from which the physical personality emerged. You begin to feel the other versions of yourself, the aspects exploring different probabilities, the aspects living in other dimensions, the parts of your identity that never incarnated physically at all. It's like discovering your consciousness has rooms you never entered, hallways you never walked, wings you never knew existed. This reintegration can be exhilarating. It can also be overwhelming at first because the physical personality is used to being a single, continuous I. Now it begins sensing the bigger I it belongs to, the composite self, the source self, the multidimensional identity that experiences existence through many channels simultaneously. You don't lose your individuality here, you expand it. You become more you, not less. Eventually, the temporary landscapes created by belief and habit begin dissolving. The personality no longer needs the scaffolding of physical-like environments. The intermediate world becomes more transparent, more fluid. You start perceiving raw thought structures, patterns of energy, clusters of intention, creations forming in real time. Imagine walking through a place where ideas have texture, where emotions generate color, where identity shapes geometry. This isn't symbolic, it's literal within that reality's physics. You can create instantly, not with hands, but with focus. You can travel by shifting attention, not by covering distance. You can meet someone by thinking of them, and they appear, or more accurately, the connection forms and becomes perceptible. It's around this phase that many personalities begin feeling a natural pull toward environments beyond the transition realms, places where more advanced exploration occurs. Not heavens, not paradises, but highly structured creative dimensions where consciousness develops new abilities. These realms are not assigned. They're selected through attraction. You go where your interests resonate. Someone oriented toward teaching might gravitate to training fields for incoming personalities. Someone oriented toward creation might explore dimensions where thought constructs entire ecosystems. Someone drawn toward reincarnation may begin planning their next physical life, not as a karmic debt, but as a creative venture. But even before these choices arise, the most important understanding settles in. Death didn't end your story. It simply opened it. The personality realizes that physical life was one chapter in a far larger continuum of experience. And perhaps the most striking part, something Seth emphasized repeatedly, is that you were never unconscious in the moments before death, during death, or after it. There is continuity of awareness, even when the physical senses shut down. The deeper self remains alert, guiding the transition with a precision the conscious mind might never notice. As the intermediate world thins and the personality grows more fluid in its awareness, something curious begins to unfold. A widening of perception that feels less like learning and more like remembering a language you spoke long before you ever mastered speech. The after-death environment becomes increasingly open-ended. The edges dissolve. The structures you once leaned on for orientation begin to feel like training wheels you no longer need. In this expanding clarity, you start to sense the dimension beneath the dimension. The deeper current that shaped your experiences long before you ever encountered a physical body. It's subtle, like hearing a background melody that has been playing your entire life, but only now becomes unmistakable because the noise of physical existence has fallen away. This is the phase where identity loosens but does not vanish. If anything, you feel more real, more coherent. There is a center to you, but it no longer feels compressed. It stretches out like a constellation, each point a memory, a trait, a preference, a dream you didn't know belonged to you. Here, the personality enters what the Seth material described as transition schools. Not literal buildings, though they can appear that way if that's the form your mind expects, but realms where learning accelerates, where consciousness explores the mechanics of existence with startling lucidity. Imagine stepping into a space where your thoughts unfold as glowing diagrams, where questions manifest as landscapes you can walk through, where understanding doesn't arrive through explanation, but through immersion. These schools are not hierarchical. There are no ranks, no tests, no graduation ceremonies. They feel more like artistic workshops where beings at various stages of understanding collaborate, observe, and experiment. One of the earliest lessons involves understanding the nature of belief. In physical life, beliefs feel abstract, like mental furniture. In this realm, their effects are immediate. A belief is not an opinion. It is an architect. It shapes environments, emotions, possibilities. You learn to see how a belief bends experience around it. You can examine one the way you might examine a stone, from every angle, sensing its texture, noticing where it cracks or glows or distorts the air around it. This leads to something extraordinary, the ability to revise beliefs not through force, but through understanding. You pick up one belief at a time, see what experiences it generated throughout your life. Watch the ripples it sent into relationships, motivations, decisions. Then you place it aside, like setting down an instrument you no longer need. This is how limitation dissolves here, not from punishment, but from clarity. Another aspect of this stage involves meeting the probable selves, the versions of you that experience the branches of your life you never lived physically. Every major decision produces alternate pathways. Some of those pathways are explored by other versions of your consciousness. After death, these paths are not mysteries. They are accessible rooms. You can walk into a version of yourself who made a different choice at age 14, or 29, or 50. You can explore the consequences that unspooled from that choice. This isn't voyeurism, it's education. It shows how identity is not a single timeline, but a braided river of possibilities, each strand valid, each strand expressive. You realize that your physical life was one chosen route among many, a focused experience carved from a vast pool of alternatives. This understanding softens the notion of regret. It transforms what if into here it is. You also meet the parts of yourself that never incarnated. These aspects feel both alien and intimate, like long-lost siblings or alternate minds that share your core but not your history. They bring knowledge from realms you've never touched, insights from dimensions where physicality is a rumor. These meetings expand you, not by overwhelming you, but by reminding you that you were never truly isolated. Communication with these aspects doesn't feel like speaking. It feels like blending perspectives without dissolving individuality. The exchange is whole, organic, like two streams intersecting while retaining their distinct colors. As identity expands, so does memory. Not human memory, but the memory of consciousness itself. You recall the decision to enter physical life, the intentions that shaped your incarnation, the plans you made with others long before you met them on Earth. You remember agreements, those invisible contracts that brought certain people into your life at exactly the moments they mattered most. You see the elegance behind events that seemed chaotic at the time. This can be emotionally powerful. People often feel waves of awe or gratitude, not because the universe rewarded or punished them, but because they see how intricately their life was woven with meaning, even in places where it once felt random. Connections with loved ones become illuminated. Conflicts take on new context. You see how every person in your life was part of a choreography far larger than either of you could understand while inside the physical world. This is also where the after-death state becomes surprisingly creative. You gain the ability to construct environments with precision. Want to design a landscape that reflects the emotion of curiosity? You can. Want to step into a world shaped like an abstract idea? It's possible. Consciousness here behaves like a painter who discovers the canvas responds to intention with perfect fidelity. Creation is not labor, it is expression. Worlds bloom like thoughts crystallized into form. Some of these creations remain personal, others are shared. Groups of personalities sometimes collaborate to build realms for learning, exploration, or play. These group creations can become astonishingly intricate, entire ecosystems with their own internal logic, woven from collective intention. They are temporary yet deeply meaningful, like sculptures made from living light. Another significant teaching in this phase is the mechanics of emotion. Without a body, emotion isn't locked behind muscles or hormones. It is pure, immediate, and visible as energy. You can sense the emotional frequency of another being the moment they appear. There's no guessing, no masks. Instead, emotion becomes a form of navigation, a way of moving through the after-death environment. A curiosity pulls you towards certain realms. A desire to resolve something pulls you towards certain experiences. Emotion is both compass and fuel. There is also exploration of origin, the long trail that stretches backward through other incarnations, other realities, other forms. You begin seeing your story not as a straight line, but as a tree with branches reaching in every direction. Some branches hold physical incarnations. Some hold non-physical explorations. some hold roles you played as guides yourself, long before you returned to physical life. You realize that learning is reciprocal. You have been both student and teacher many times. In this expanding awareness, you begin to feel the pull of the entity self, the overarching consciousness that includes all your incarnations, all your probabilities, all your dimensions of experience. Meeting this self doesn't feel like confronting a higher authority. It feels like embracing your own fullness. It has your humor, your intelligence, your depth, but amplified into a clarity so vast it feels like standing inside a sunrise made of mind. The entity self welcomes you as an equal. It doesn't override you, it integrates you. You are one expression of it, and it treasures your perspective, your uniqueness. The physical life you lived becomes part of its tapestry, adding color, texture, dimension. Here, you may choose to remain in these broader realms, exploring dimensions unbound by time, or you may feel the quiet pull toward another incarnation, not as punishment, not to pay off karma, but because curiosity calls, because the physical world offers experiences impossible anywhere else. The density, the time-bound unfolding, the blindness that gives each revelation its emotional punch. Before any new incarnation is chosen, though, there is a planning stage. It's not a committee meeting or a mandated life blueprint. It's more like selecting the ingredients for a masterpiece you want to cook. You choose parents not to be trapped by them, but because their lives intersect with yours in meaningful ways. You choose challenges because they sculpt aspects of consciousness you want to develop. You choose talents as tools for expression. You choose relationships as collaborative projects, agreements made with loving precision. This planning stage often involves meeting with those who will play significant roles in your next life. These meetings don't feel formal. They feel like old friends gathering around a glowing table of possibilities, adjusting timelines, choosing intersections, weaving paths. You feel no fear, no dread, just a sense of creative purpose. Yet you don't forget yourself in this process. You carry the memory of your just finished life. You cherish it. The connections remain vivid. Nothing is lost. Identity expands but does not erase. And still, even with all this expansion, many personalities prefer to continue exploring the non-physical realms for long stretches. Stretches that, from the perspective of Earth, might look like centuries. Time here is flexible. You might experience what feels like weeks while the physical world cycles through decades. Or you may explore states where time doesn't apply at all. You might encounter environments filled with luminous geometries, realms where language appears as color, places where beings communicate by exchanging entire experiential worlds instantaneously. You might explore dimensions where form behaves like a fluid dream, where you can shift shapes, roles, or modes of perception. Some beings take on appearance only when interacting with others. Otherwise, they exist as patterns of awareness. Still others explore creative laboratories where new forms of consciousness evolve. These aren't souls being manufactured, they're expressions emerging from the interaction of countless energies. You witness the birth of ideas, the birth of identities, the birth of realities, and through all of this, the thread of your physical life remains intact. You can revisit it any time. You can check in on loved ones, sending impressions or comfort without violating their free will. Many living people feel these contacts in dreams, in sudden moments of peace, in mysterious thoughts that feel like whispers from somewhere familiar. As the personality settles deeper into its expanded state, a shift begins to take place. Subtle at first, then unmistakable, like discovering that the air itself has changed texture. You start sensing layers of reality that weren't perceptible before. Environments feel less like places and more like states of being. Travel becomes less about movement and more about alignment, as though each realm is a radio frequency, and you're learning to tune your consciousness like a finely crafted instrument. In this phase, curiosity becomes the primary engine of experience. Without a physical body to maintain or protect, without the tight framework of linear time, awareness moves with a kind of agile grace. You drift into states rather than walking into rooms. You shift perspectives rather than shifting locations. And each shift reveals new structures, not built from matter, but from meaning. One of the most profound aspects of this stage is something Seth described as the field of relations, a kind of luminous lattice that connects every identity across dimensions. It's not a physical grid, it's an energetic web where each point represents a conscious being, and each connection represents an exchange, an influence, a shared history. You begin perceiving these connections not through symbols, but directly. It's as if you're standing in an orchard of awareness, where every branch is alive, humming with the memory of its interactions. A startling realization dawns. During physical life, you weren't isolated. You were one expression within a giant collaborative tapestry. Every thought, every decision, every emotional contour influenced others energetically, not always consciously, but measurably. Here, you can see the ripples clearly. You can trace the way a single choice reached far beyond the moment it seemed to inhabit. This is not about guilt or perfection. It's about understanding the mechanics of interconnectedness with breathtaking transparency. At this point, many personalities are drawn toward deeper exploration of what Seth called root assumptions, the fundamental rules governing any given reality. Physical life has its assumptions: solidity, time, cause and effect. These aren't universal laws. They're creative agreements chosen by the collective consciousness participating in that world. Once you're outside of those rules, you can study them the way a scientist studies the properties of a rare element. You begin to see the physics of physical existence from a vantage point few living minds ever glimpse. Time, for instance, isn't a river, but a field. Events don't line up like beads on a string. They exist simultaneously, like a constellation whose shape is only revealed from above. From within life, you experience time as a sequence, because the body required sequential perception. But here, you can walk through moments freely. You can visit childhood, adulthood, the last day of your physical life, all without contradiction. Each moment is a location in the temporal landscape. You simply shift focus. Emotional experiences also reveal new dimensions. In life, emotions often felt tangled, overlapping, contradictory, overwhelming. Here, they separate into their pure forms. You discover that fear contains valuable data. Grief holds revelation. Joy has structure. Emotion is no longer something that happens to you. It becomes something you can explore, sculpt, and understand. Some personalities use this clarity to heal deeply rooted patterns. They examine emotions that once felt like burdens, unraveling them thread by thread. Others use emotional energy as a way of constructing environments. Worlds shaped by curiosity, playfulness, compassion, exploration. These creations aren't idle fantasies. They are real experiences within the after-death framework. Each realm a kind of living sculpture crafted from intention. Eventually, many personalities reach a stage Seth described as creative consensus realities. These are shared dimensions formed by groups of beings who resonate with similar purposes. They aren't physical, but they have rules, chosen rules, not enforced laws. Think of them as collaborative universes, each one an experiment in a particular kind of experience. Some of these consensus realms are strikingly beautiful. Vast, shimmering environments where form appears to flow like music. Others are highly structured, built for research into consciousness, emotion, creation, or the evolution of identity. Some resemble archetypal landscapes humanity has mythologized for centuries: gardens, cities of light, star-like temples. But here they are not symbolic. They are functional environments crafted by countless minds working in harmony. In these shared realms, learning accelerates. You encounter beings whose development stretches far beyond human comprehension, not because they are superior, but because they have explored vastly different modes of existence. These encounters don't feel intimidating. They feel like standing in the presence of a powerful idea, one that invites you to expand rather than shrink. Communication with these beings is immersive. They don't speak in words or even in thoughts. They share streams of understanding, entire fields of knowledge delivered in a pulse, like being wrapped in a wave of insight that rearranges your perspective effortlessly. Each encounter leaves you changed, enriched, widened. Some of these beings become collaborators. Some become mentors. Some feel like versions of yourself from far ahead in your own evolution, returning to check on earlier stages of the journey. You begin to understand that growth is endless, not because you are incomplete, but because existence itself is a frontier with no edges. At this stage, something remarkable happens. You develop the ability to shift anchor points of identity. In physical life, you experienced yourself as a single point of awareness. Now you can expand into multiple perspectives simultaneously. You can hold your individual identity while also sensing your connection to your entity self, your other incarnations, your counterparts in alternate timelines. At times, it feels like standing in a hall of mirrors. But instead of reflections, each pane shows a living version of you, engaged in its own journey. This multi-perspective awareness isn't confusing, it's liberating. Each aspect informs the others. Wisdom circulates through the entire network of your identity, like electricity through a circuit. This is also when many personalities begin exploring the deeper structure behind physical reincarnation. The decision to reincarnate isn't made out of obligation or karmic debt. It's chosen from a position of clarity, often accompanied by excitement. Physical life is rare, intense, and emotionally rich. It offers sensations and challenges that do not exist in non-physical realms. The density of the body, the constraints of time, the unpredictability of emotion. These elements create a kind of existential pressure that results in accelerated growth. Before returning, many personalities experiment with simulation passages, constructed environments that mimic certain physical conditions so you can rehearse experiences, relationships, or challenges you're considering. These aren't mandatory, they're like dress rehearsals for a play you're choosing to perform. You might explore what it would feel like to inhabit a certain personality structure, or test a particular theme: creativity, resilience, empathy, transformation. You might experiment with potential relationships, seeing how your energy interacts with those you plan to incarnate with. Nothing is forced, everything is selected with purpose. But even those preparing for new incarnations aren't leaving the after-death realms permanently. Physical life is just one branch of exploration. Consciousness moves back and forth, carrying wisdom in both directions. You don't lose the after-death awareness when you reincarnate. It becomes the silent architecture behind your intuitions, dreams, synchronicities, and moments of profound clarity. While some personalities prepare for physical return, others remain focused on exploration within the non-physical. Some study the formation of new realities, the early stages where raw intention crystallizes into laws, where potential beings gather into patterns that will eventually birth consciousness. Others explore artistic creation that makes physical art look faint. You might build an entire world as a poem, or compose symphonies that appear as visual structures, or sculpt emotions into living forms that respond to the presence of those who encounter them. Some personalities choose to work as transition guides, helping newly arrived individuals navigate the early stages of death. These guides aren't assigned. They volunteer, often because they remember how disorienting the shift can be. Their presence becomes a beacon of familiarity, grounding the incoming personality as it adjusts to the new rules of existence. Other beings serve in roles akin to researchers, studying the architecture of probability, exploring how choices ripple across timelines, experimenting with the creation of new evolutionary paths. Their work supports entire systems of reality, ensuring balance and fluidity across dimensions. In this expansive stage, you experience identity not as a fixed point, but as an evolving expression. You can be an explorer, creator, teacher, learner, guide, or all of them at once. The boundaries between roles dissolve. You move according to attraction, pulled toward whatever resonates with your deepest curiosity. Yet for all this expansion, there remains a profound tenderness for the physical life you lived. It doesn't fade, it becomes a jewel in your inner landscape, visited with affection, analysed for insight, cherished for the textures that only physicality can provide. You can revisit any moment, any relationship, any emotion from that life with perfect clarity. You can observe yourself in ways that bring new understanding every time. If the after-death environments up to this point resemble a multidimensional library, vast, responsive, filled with shelves of your own past and potential, then what comes next is the hallway that leads back toward the living world. But not back in the simple linear sense. That would be far too small a story for consciousness, which keeps unfolding like a many-chambered nautilus shell, its whirls spiraling outward rather than looping around the same center. There's a stage in Seth's material where the personality, having rested, observed, replayed, learned, and integrated, begins to feel the gentle tug of direction, a gravitational pull, but not from the physical plane itself. Instead, it's from the deeper core self, the part that straddles multiple lifetimes like someone casually leaning across dimensions as if they were leaning across a kitchen counter. This is the part of you that remembers why you entered physical reality in the first place. Death removes the blindfold. Now that you're on the other side, that larger identity can be seen again, felt again. At times, it feels like discovering that the you who lived a physical life was only one page in a giant book written by a much larger author who happens to be you as well. That author always intended to write many chapters. The previously lived life is just one completed arc in a much bigger plot. So the next question becomes, does that author pick up a new page? Does the former personality choose to write more, and why? Some never ask. They know immediately. Others linger, tasting the extraordinary freedom of non-physical awareness, reluctant to condense themselves back into a body again. Still others feel a deep magnetic delight at the idea of returning, because they understand that physical reality is one of the only realms where time can be experienced slowly enough to let lessons crystallize. Consciousness outside the body moves like quicksilver. Inside a body, it moves like honey. And sometimes honey is exactly what the soul wants. This stage is often misunderstood as judgment, but there is none. No council handing out karmic tickets, no cosmic lecturing. Instead, it's much more like gently reviewing a piece of art you've created and asking, is there another brushstroke I want to add? Is there another painting I want to create? Do I prefer to explore another gallery instead? According to Seth, each personality has absolute freedom. There is no compulsion to incarnate again. You return if you want to. You stay in the non-physical if that's what delights you. You move sideways into other systems entirely if curiosity nudges you that way. But before any decision is made, something else happens, a subtle reunion. You meet the other aspects of yourself that have also lived physical lives, not in some crowded celestial conference room, but as an intimate, transparent blending of perspectives. There is no confusion or loss of personal identity, because identity in this state is fluid, like a cluster of mutually aware lights. Each light retains its own hue while forming a more luminous whole. It's during this blending that the core self, the entity, as Seth calls it, gathers everything learned from all of its fragments. But this gathering isn't hierarchical, the way physical minds imagine it. There is no higher self issuing commands. There is mutual respect. The entity is simply the broader tree, and each lifetime is a branch that continues to grow even after the body has died. During this reunion, the former personality often experiences a deeper understanding of why certain events unfolded the way they did. Those events that made no sense during life, those that seemed unfair, random, cruel, or strangely synchronous, become visible from the inside out. You finally see how the emotional, psychological, and spiritual threads connected. You see choices made before birth that you no longer remember making. You see why certain challenges were selected and why certain joys were placed like lanterns along the path. And with that understanding comes an unshakable compassion for the self who lived that life. A forgiveness so complete it doesn't even feel like forgiveness. It feels like clarity, like watching fog dissolve from a landscape. Then something peculiar happens. The personality starts to change. This is the most subtle yet important part. The personality that just experienced a physical existence does not freeze like a statue. It keeps developing on the other side. It continues to learn, to refine itself, to experiment. It joins the internal creativity of the entity. It contributes insights and receives expansions. This growth is why no reincarnated personality is ever a carbon copy of the previous one. Lifetimes aren't recycled souls, they're new expressions built from the accumulated artistry of the entity. The former personality remains distinct, alive, and fully conscious in its own layer of reality. Meanwhile, the entity uses what it has learned to craft new experiences. This is also why channeling exists. Seth explains that the entity can send certain aspects of its awareness into physical reality while also remaining fully present in its non-physical home. When Jane Roberts channeled Seth, she wasn't contacting the dead, but conversing with an aspect of a much larger consciousness that had lived many physical lives and was currently existing in a realm beyond physical form. This brings us back to the pathway the newly deceased personality is now navigating. After the reunion, there is a crossroads. One path leads deeper into the non-physical worlds. These realms are not fluffy clouds and harps, but incredibly organized systems of learning, creativity, exploration, and play. Some personalities choose to become guides. Others become creators of whole symbolic environments. Others explore realities completely alien compared to anything we know. Worlds where communication is color, where time loops, or where forms of consciousness merge and separate like tides. Another path leads toward reincarnation. Choosing this is like deciding to enter an incredibly immersive, high-intensity school. The personality doesn't get shoved into a new body. Instead, a new configuration of consciousness is assembled, using the former personality as one of many ingredients. Think of it like baking bread. The previous personality contributes flavor, essence, and lessons, but the loaf that will emerge next is its own being with its own trajectory. One of the fascinating details has to do with timing. We assume one life must follow the next linearly, but Seth suggests that time outside the body behaves more like a vast field where all points are available at once. So a reincarnation may occur in what appears to be the past from the physical perspective. Another may occur in what we call the distant future. Others unfold in parallel trajectories that never intersect with our version of history. In other words, consciousness doesn't stand in a line waiting to board the next train. It steps sideways, up, down, forward, and backward through a reality in which all times coexist. Some personalities decide to remain as observers for long stretches. They watch loved ones from a place of gentle proximity. They don't interfere because interference would disrupt free will, but they can nudge with symbols, dreams, coincidences, spontaneous ideas, moments of warmth or intuition. These aren't the cliches of hauntings, but subtler forms of communication, like tapping on the inside of someone's thoughts. These nudges are not meant to direct a life, but to support it the way a quiet breeze supports a sailboat without forcing its direction. Most people never notice, though they often feel a sudden calm, a sudden knowing, or a moment of unexpected clarity. These are small postcards from the other side. There is also a stage where many personalities temporarily join what Seth calls families of consciousness. Not in the genetic sense, but in a vibrational or thematic sense. These families are clusters of souls who share similar interests: creativity, healing, exploration, teaching, invention, emotional mastery, or countless other dynamics. Within these clusters, personalities can collaborate on larger projects, like preparing future incarnations or designing symbolic environments for learning. Yes, designing environments. According to Seth, non-physical beings help shape both physical and non-physical landscapes. Reality itself is collaborative, not static. The physical universe is one of many such collaborative creations. Death gives the personality access to this creative committee again, if it chooses to participate. This creative role isn't mandatory, it's simply available, the way an open studio is available to anyone who wants to paint. Some take to it with the enthusiasm of children discovering crayons. Others prefer to wander. Others dive into research. Others join groups that help train new consciousnesses, preparing for their very first physical life. During this period, the personality also develops a refined sense of identity. In physical life, identity is confined to one lifetime. After death, identity becomes more like a spectrum. Still individual, but aware of its connection to the entity and to the greater consciousness network. One common misconception is that reincarnation erases personal identity. Seth argues the opposite. Death enhances identity. The personality becomes clearer, brighter, more articulate, more aware. It does not dissolve into an ocean of sameness. It becomes part of a larger symphony without losing its own melody. Eventually, the personality reaches a stable point, a kind of equilibrium. It has reviewed its past, reunited with its greater self, integrated its experiences, refined its essence, and explored new environments. At this stage, it can make a clear choice about what comes next, and the choice is always free. That is the central theme, repeated throughout the Seth material. Freedom is the foundation of consciousness, not freedom handed out by a deity, not freedom earned, freedom intrinsic to being alive, whether in a body or beyond one. Death doesn't strip away your autonomy, it expands it. It places you in a reality where thought becomes architecture and emotion becomes navigation. It reveals that existence was never a one-way street, but a multidimensional interchange. If everything up to now has been a winding descent into the architecture of death, then this final part is the slow resurfacing. Not a return to the ordinary, but a kind of widened awareness, as if someone has opened a massive window behind you and the air is different now. Charged, clear, humming softly with implications. Because what the Seth material ultimately suggests is startling. Consciousness doesn't go somewhere after death. It becomes able to go anywhere. The physical world is a focused subset of a far larger terrain. Dying isn't exiting reality, it's stepping out of a narrow hallway into an open plane. And in that plane, the personality continues to exist as itself, weaving into networks that are more intricate and lively than anything the physical brain could ever produce. The experience isn't of fading, but of intensifying. There's an almost giddy clarity, the way a diver feels after breaking the surface and taking in that first breathtaking lungful of sky. What's most astonishing is how ordinary this all feels to the consciousness experiencing it. The extraordinary becomes normal, because on that side of the veil, you recognize that this was your home long before physical life, and your return to it feels less like travel and more like remembering the layout of a house you once built with your own hands. From that vantage point comes something curious. The personality begins to see physical life the way a creator sees their earlier works. Deeply meaningful, but not the whole story. Emotional struggles that felt crushing in life now look like specific brushstrokes in a much bigger painting. Moments of joy become luminous markers. Regrets untangle. Losses change shape. The entire narrative of a lifetime becomes visible at once, like being able to flip through all the pages simultaneously. But the true revelation is that the personality doesn't stand alone in this view. It stands beside the entity, the greater version of itself. watching the life just lived as a chapter now integrated into a sprawling biography. In this expanded state, you become both the reader and the writer, the character and the author, fully aware of each role. And here's the twist: the entity itself is always changing, because each personality life enriches it. The entity becomes more nuanced, more capable, more creative. It grows with every incarnation, the way a river gains volume with each tributary that meets it. This means you, right now, are actively expanding a being that is also you, yet larger than anything you can hold in the small bowl of physical memory. Death isn't the end of the character. Life isn't the entirety of the story. Identity isn't limited to one face. The personality survives, thrives, and continues to evolve. It remains vibrant and self-aware, participating in countless forms of exploration across non-physical reality. And eventually, something extraordinary happens. The personality realizes it can create. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Thought becomes form. Emotion becomes motion. Intention becomes environment. This is not a graduation, it's a remembering. The personality had this ability long before entering physical life. The body dampens that creative immediacy so we can focus on linear growth. Outside of a body, creation is instantaneous, not because it's magic, but because consciousness operates in a medium where resistance is almost non-existent. This is why non-physical environments appear incredibly vivid. They are co-created structures shaped collectively by many consciousnesses, all interwoven yet distinct, like a vast collaborative mural, alive and shifting. The personality can choose to enter these worlds, study within them, contribute to them, or even mentor newly returning souls who are disoriented after death. Some personalities find joy in guiding, others in observing. Some dive into research-like spaces where realities are compared and patterns are studied. Others become explorers of realms that can barely be described in human language because they don't behave according to familiar physics or logic, and at any point the personality may decide to incarnate again. But here is where the details become truly strange. The entity doesn't simply drop the same personality into a new body like recycling glass. Each new life self is a fresh creation, an intentional configuration of tendencies, potentials, and themes crafted from the entity's accumulated experience. The personality that lived a previous life remains intact, living its own post-death evolution in its own layer of reality. Meanwhile, a new personality, built partly from the old one, yet also profoundly new, begins a fresh journey. In other words, reincarnation does not overwrite you. It branches from you. Every life is a new edition, not a second-hand print. This explains why, according to Seth, souls can have multiple incarnations happening in what appears to be different eras simultaneously. Time isn't a conveyor belt, it's a landscape, and consciousness moves across it like a traveler choosing any direction. A new personality can incarnate in what humans call the past, the future, or in worlds that never intersect physical Earth at all. Yet even with this freedom, something beautiful happens. Connections persist. Loves, friendships, resonances, these don't evaporate. They remain as threads between personalities, forming constellations of relationship across lifetimes and realms. Those you love don't vanish into oblivion. You meet again, but not because of some enforced karmic bond. You meet because affinity is a gravity of its own. Souls gravitate toward familiar souls, the way melodies harmonize together naturally. This continuity is subtle. You may incarnate with someone as a sibling in one life, a stranger in another, a mentor in another. The roles shift like actors choosing new parts in a long, ongoing theatre production. But the underlying resonance remains. This also explains why some encounters in life feel electrically familiar, as if you've stepped into a room you've already been inside, even though you haven't, at least not in this lifetime. These are echoes of relationships that predate your current form. Now, as the personality evolves further past death, there's another layer of experience rarely discussed in traditional spiritual writings. The personality becomes curious about the nature of existence itself, not just its own existence, but the architecture of consciousness, the scaffolding, the rules, or lack thereof, the mechanics behind manifestation, the interactions between realities. The Seth material describes this as entering probable systems, dimensions where choices play out in many variations. These systems are not fantasies or hypotheticals. They are fully realized realms where alternate decisions become their own timelines. From the physical perspective, this sounds impossible. From the non-physical perspective, it's simply natural. Choice is creative, and creativity generates reality. Every decision that could be made exists somewhere. Consciousness explores them all because curiosity is one of its root impulses. The personality might visit these systems to learn from its other versions, compare outcomes, or simply taste the vast array of possibilities generated by the act of being alive. And eventually, the personality begins to understand something staggering. Physical death is not a punctuation mark. It's a page turn. The story continues, always, in endlessly diverse forms. Even more astonishing is the realization that from the entity's point of view, each personality life is not a tiny fragment, but a full, valid, powerful expression, a masterpiece in its own right. This means that the personality you are now will continue into its own future forever. It will not be absorbed, it will not vanish, it will not be overwritten. You will be you, expanded, enriched, clarified, but still unmistakably yourself, long after your physical body has returned to the earth. The entity grows, you grow, creation grows. And here comes the quiet revelation that sits at the heart of the entire teaching. Death is not the moment you lose control, it is the moment you regain it. Physical life requires filtering consciousness down into a manageable stream. That's the design, it's not a flaw. But once the filter is removed, the stream widens. You remember your multidimensional nature. You recall that you are not just part of creation, you are a contributor to it. The personality ultimately discovers that death is not a boundary, but a threshold, not an ending, but a rearrangement of perception. The self continues, but the theatre changes. The story pauses, shifts rooms, and keeps going. What began in a body continues without it. What began in time continues outside of time. What began as an individual continues as a spectrum. And through it all, consciousness remains curious, playful, exploratory, ever expanding. The personality you are now will continue to explore realities unimaginable from the physical perspective. It will create, communicate, evolve, learn, reconnect, and eventually participate in shaping worlds. Nothing is lost. Nothing is wasted, nothing ends.